Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about getting a job quickly. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, what kind of developer should I become to get a job quickly? I want to learn skills that are in high demand and that will help me secure a job fast. Once I have a job, I plan to learn other things to expand my skills. Well, if you're looking for a developer job and you want it to be really, really quick, I would say that depending now a little bit, I think that it's gonna for me. It's gonna be between if you just want like the quickest way to get there. It's either gonna be one of the low code platforms, or it's gonna be like a mobile development, or it's going to be front end development if you're into like web stuff and so forth. The reason why I'm mentioning the low code and things like that is because I will argue to you, and I'm sure some will not agree completely with me on this one, but if you went into becoming a low code developer and so forth, it is a feasible thing to do, but you're not, in my opinion, that is going to be what we call a mainstream software developer. So most mainstream software developers, like serious software developers, work in web and web development and so forth, and like mobile and so forth and so forth. Like we usually don't have a limitation that is as strict as you, for example, only work with WordPress, or you only work with some specific like CMS system or something like that, which is what in not always, there are more tools than that, of course, but low coders are usually more tied into a very specific platform. Those platforms are useful for certain situations, but if you want to have the width to basically move around a little bit and work on most projects and do what I would refer to as mainstream programming, it's better for you to focus on mobile or front end if you're just in it for like how fast you can get there. Now, the reason why I say this is because mobile, in a sense, is a little bit like front end, but at the very least for front end, the main reason as to why that is a little bit faster is because, on average, the skills that you need in order to be a serious software developer in, say, a backend role, usually people require you to have a better understanding of theory and so forth, apart from just being able to use the tools of the trade. Now, in front end, it's different. In front end, the main thing that they care about is that you have the right tools on your CV. In other words, and of course, as you can imagine, experience is always a factor. It doesn't matter which role you have. Back end, front end, mobile, desktop, IoT. It doesn't matter what you do. Like, experience will always be a factor. But if we put that aside and just consider you as a junior software developer, and you are, for the sake of argument now, able to find roles that are for juniors, then on average it's going to be easier for you to land a front end job than a back end job. Mainly because, as I said, the focus for the front end development and the hiring and so forth is more on the tools of the trade, like what frameworks like React, Angular, Vue, or whatever, right? And from my experience, the knowledge that people have around what constitutes as a good front end developer is so low that basically anybody who is not completely hopeless will be able to swing that they are a front end developer. It is, to me, a little bit of a joke, honestly, the way that people hire for front end today, because I mean, I can tell you literally that if I were to count on my 5 fingers how many front-end developers that I know that I would consider to be true seniors and who knows like all the things, like how to scale a project, what tools to pick in order to make sure that it's sustainable, and I mean even a simple thing as writing proper tests, I will not get to the end of my hand. That's how bad it is. It is literally the case that the state of frontend is, in my opinion, such a big joke when it comes to theory and good software practices and in-depth knowledge that basically anybody who takes a boot camp with some, I'm just leaving myself a little bit of wiggle room here, because even if you have a boot camp and so forth, doesn't necessarily mean that you can impress in the interview and so forth. But the skill requirement for a front-end developer today is literally put at, can you produce a UI that looks correctly. That's it. Literally, that's it for like the average for the average jobs. Now there is a bit of like a nuance to this as well, and that is the specific role that you're looking for. So if you're unlucky, depending on how you look at it, in some regions, like guys, I've talked to front-end developers who don't know how to use CSS because they didn't have to, because they had another person to do that, because in some places in the world and some companies, they have like even lower standards than I would call average. Now the average is usually working with things like React, like an SVA framework or something similar to that, knowing how to use like some very basic SCSS, SAS or something like that, just to do basic styling and stuff like that. In some cases you might use like a CSS framework like Tailwind or Bootstrap or Foundation or what have you. There's a bunch of them, right? Those are usually the main popular ones, and Material Design and things like that. But anywho, these are the basics. Like testing is something like it's a joke. Basically every single time I interview for a job, like nobody, like literally no front-end developer I know has ever, like I think I remember 1 or 2 times someone actually wrote any tests for their coding challenge, which I mean that's not a big deal. But even today, guys, like it was the first thing that I got assigned to in my current job as a principal software engineer, where basically I did an inventory of all the various products and so forth. And as you can imagine, we had a few of the backend code, like like this was hilarious. It happened the other day. I was doing an interview or like a review with one of the software teams, and I asked them what their code coverage was, and they say, well, we have about 90%. And then they said like, yeah, we're using JCocoa like for Java developers, right? Or the whole team, like the backend was in Java. And I said, okay, cool, but the front end, what's this coverage there? And then it was just quiet. What do you mean? Well, are you testing front end? No. It was so we literally had this conversation for the longest time. We talked about testing and what strategies they had and so forth and so forth, and not once under the whole conversation, had I not asked, they wouldn't even have thought about telling me what their coverage was, because I literally had to specify, are you doing this in front end? Because it's so much of a joke to have these sorts of things in place in front end, and so few front end developers actually take it seriously or do it properly, that most of the industry, I mean, it's not embedded into the culture whatsoever. And I can only say that this has been the case for every single job I've ever been at, in every single company. I am pretty sure that it's going to stay there for quite some time, and that's why I say to you that like the level that you need in terms of skill to do front end, depending on the company, it can be more, it can be less, but on average is, in my experience, and this is me saying it as someone who has done serious front-end development as a senior level plus, call it whatever you want, right, for years and years and years. I am a full-fledged back-end developer, done that at a senior level for years and years and years, so I like to credit myself a little bit, if I am allowed to pat myself a little bit on the shoulder and say that I am a real quote-unquote full stack developer. I'm not like one of those guys who's going to tell you, oh, I know mostly backend and then I know a little bit of front end, like the standard where you know like some basic stuff in one stack or the other, and then you mostly use in the other one. I can basically do any job regardless of its front end or back end, and having that experience and doing this as a serious level, both in both areas, sometimes at the same time, but in many cases also for it's different companies, I can tell you that the level of skill that I had to prove or to sort of show that I was a serious backend developer was on average a lot more than front end. And the same thing goes for when you evaluate code, your code reviews and everything like that. The level that you need to produce in terms of software is a lot lower in front end. Most people just click approve when I mean, you might get a comment here and there about basic things, right? But on average, you're never going to be stopped or something like that. Like, it's really rare that anybody even knows how to do a basic thing like create a good React component or something like that. Because literally the whole way that it works is, as long as it does the job, then it's good. So what I want you to take away from this is that if you want to get a developer job really, really quickly, I suggest that you take literally any arbitrary bootcamp that teaches you ASP.NET framework. React is really popular, but you can do Angular as well. Doesn't really matter. There are others as well, but those are the main ones. Depending on your region, now you should always check your region. Always, whatever you, if you listen to me or anybody else, always go and check yourself against the job postings in your region to figure out which tools are most in demand. Once you have that bootcamp, it should have landed you with some basic knowledge of ASP.NET framework. You should know the basics of how work with CSS and so forth. I really urge you, don't get caught in just using something like Tailwind for everything or Bootstrap or stuff like that. CSS frameworks are great, but you cannot rely on that they will be the main thing that is being used in every situation. There are a lot of front-end developers who sort of miss this and doesn't realize that just because Tailwind is popular doesn't mean that your next employer is using it. So you really have to take the time to learn something like a preprocessor like Sass or SCSS or something like that. Those are usually that Sass is like the oldest kid on the block for many people. Like it's the most usual go-to for a lot of companies. It's the one that would be probably the best fit for you if you're just going to go for speed. But you can also face off against CSS and JS solutions and stuff like that, especially if you're doing React development or something similar like that. It's quite popular there. But for like Angular, it's SCSS or Sass. It doesn't really matter. They're so similar that it's basically the same, in my opinion. So those are the main things you need to figure out in order to be a successful front-end developer, I would say, or well, at the very least be applicable for most front-end roles. And then of course, learn what CML, like a real HTML, like what is semantic HTML and things like that, and some basics about, how to work in a browser and stuff like that. And if you by some miracle get to work with me in one of my teams or so forth, then you're going to have to learn your testing. I will forgive you for not knowing it, especially if you're a junior, because I'm so accustomed to that it's not even on the map for most people, that I know that like I can put the requirement there, but if I want to hire anybody, then I can't make that like a gatekeeper type of thing where you can't get into the company if you're not writing tests, because I know that then I'm gonna interview for months at least until I find someone who actually does it. So that's why I give you that advice. I'm not super fond of the sentiment around this, because I think that you have, so in my opinion, the very least, you're focusing on the wrong thing. But since I do believe in giving the best advice I can give, and without biases, this is the best advice I can give you. You can do the same journey with mobile. You can also do backend but if you really don't care and you just want to go for speed, it's likely that web frontend will be the surest bet, due to, as I said, the level is like most of the industry doesn't know what good front end looks like, and the overall skills you need to just produce a UI is fairly low in comparison to what you might need to know in other sorts of platforms. Have a great day.